What's up everybody, Guy here from Total Geek Live, and I'm doing a presentation video on one of my favorite arcade games of all time, Pac-Man. Now there's a lot of videos out there that really cover the detailed history of Pac-Man, so I'm not really going to go into so much into that, as that's been covered so many times over. What I am going to cover are just a few fun facts, a little behind the scenes of Pac-Man, but primarily come at it from a personal perspective and the influences it's had on my life over the years. So Pac-Man was originally created by a man named Toru Iwatani, who worked at Namco. Pac-Man came out in 1980 in Japan, although it came out several months later in 1980 on October 25th to US audiences. One of the primary inspirations for Pac-Man's design was said to have been a pizza pie, and just simply removing one slice of pizza from it, giving it that distinctive round shape with the bite taken out of it. Although Pac-Man was primarily designed to attract female players into the arcades, there weren't a lot of girl gamers back in the 1980s arcades, as there were more primarily space shooters and war games, and Iwatani wanted to bring something a little bit more fun and colorful to the arcades. It actually did succeed very, very well, as Pac-Man Fever swept the nation. It was sold ultimately over 350,000 copies. Worldwide, established the first video game mascot, and established the maze chase genre. Although when they did bring it over to the United States, they did have to make a few changes to the name, as it was originally known as Puck-Man, so they changed it over to Pac-Man because vandals can so easily make a P into an F, which would have been all sorts of fun. Now, there's a lot of games out there in the Pac-Man series that still spawn even to this day. So I'm only going to talk about the two biggest games, Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man came out a little less than a year and a half later on January 13th, 1982. That was put out by Midway, who held the arcade distribution rights in the United States. Originally, it came from a conversion kit for a game called Crazy Otto. Midway was very impatient at the time, waiting for that next big Pac-Man sequel, as it was such a runaway hit, which originally would have been Super Pac-Man if it had been a Namco-developed game, but Midway decided to use Crazy Otto, changed a few graphics around, and Miss Pac-Man was born. It did just as well, ultimately selling 115,000 cabinets. But it also caused a lot of friction between Namco and Midway. Because of these unauthorized ports that Midway was doing, you can also thank Professor Pac-Man for that, that was the beginning of the end of terminating the rights of licensing agreements between Namco and Midway. Miss Pac-Man brought several features to the Pac-Man genre, such as 4 mazes instead of Pac-Man's 1, a bouncing fruit, and also the addition of a Pac-Man family, as Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man had their courtship, fell in love, and eventually had a baby. And of course, with the advent of home consoles, it didn't take long before people started demanding their own home version of Pac-Man. And they did get it for the Atari 2600, sort of. When they got Pac-Man, designed by Todd Fry, and it took about 5 months to develop the game, and it showed. They used one of the lowest carts at the time, which was only 4K. The current largest size at that time was 8K. And it came out on March 16th, 1982. It did very well. It was the highest selling 2600 game of all time, although they sold 7 million copies, but they created 12 million. So there were a lot of leftover games that never got sold. It was reasons such as this and other games such as E.T. the Extraterrestrial that eventually caused the demise of home console powerhouse, leaving a lot of really upset people. So let's talk a little bit about what I like about Pac-Man. I will say Pac-Man is one of my favorite arcade games of all time, although, to be quite honest, Miss Pac-Man actually beats it out just slightly. That's because of the extra additions they feature with the game, including the 4 mazes, the bouncing fruit, and of course it just feels a little bit more of a refined experience, especially if you find one that has the turbo feature to it. Pac-Man is a far more advanced game than a lot of people realize. It goes all the way up to 256 screens before that final screen starts glitching out. You can only see half the screen, and then after that the game crashes and you're done. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that each of the 4 ghosts have very distinct personalities. So let's talk about the 4 ghosts and what they do. Well, there's Bashful, otherwise known as Inky. He inhabits the lower right-hand corner. He's a little bit of a shy ghost, as his name implies, or as the American name implies. If you're aggressive enough with him and kind of charge at him and kind of fake out, he breaks off and will go another way. Blinky, otherwise known as Shadow, is the red ghost that goes in the upper right corner. That ghost lives up to its namesake and will aggressively follow you. It is the most relentless ghost in terms of following you around the entire maze, very rarely breaking chase. Pinky, Speedy, the pink ghost, resides in the upper left corner. This ghost is the fastest ghost that will hunt you down. And another little side note that you may not know about, eating dots will actually slow down Pac-Man just a slight bit, so that actually will make all the difference between a quick getaway or not. And then there is Pokey, or Clyde, or Sue if you're playing this Pac-Man. Pokey resides in the lower left-hand corner, and Pokey will be chasing you and then decide not to and go off and do his own little thing. Pokey is the slowest of the group and is one of the most unpredictable in terms of just what are they going to do. Are they going to follow you or they're not? In my game playing experience, my worst nemesis are Pinky and Blinky. Inky and Clyde only provide so much challenge, but they can get you, and they are a little bit more aggressive than you think. There were a lot of other great features that I enjoyed about Pac-Man as a whole. In the world of black and white games, and even some games with very limited colors, Pac-Man was a full spectrum of colors. Each one of the ghosts had a very specific bold color. Pac-Man himself was a bright yellow. The maze was a very pleasant electronic blue. And each one of the fruit pieces had a very nice distinctive color. And there were several fruit pieces to collect as you progressed farther and farther into the game. It very much looked like candy and was very eye-appealing, especially back in 1980. Another addition that made Pac-Man so appealing was the intermissions that would happen between every 2 to 3 levels. Nice little funny cartoon that actually showed a little bit of a different type of chase scene between Pac-Man and the ghosts. Some that hinted at that introduction of Super Pac-Man. And also that Pac-Man would run past a nail, which the ghost would catch their sheet on and reveal a little pink leg underneath. Underneath, they did look like a little pink fleshy blobs, which is kind of creepy if you think about it. But Pac-Man just had a lot of great appeal to it. It was fun, it was great music, great sound, and just a lot of smart gameplay. You could play Pac-Man, but if you started really understanding how the ghosts work, even if you didn't necessarily follow the patterns, that would make it an easy and eventual trip around the maze. You could still go far. You just had to understand how the ghosts work and clear out their respective corners. You could rack up some significant points if you ate one of the power pellets, which would give you additional bonuses every time you ate all the ghosts. So each successive ghost in a row eventually lands you up to 1,600 points, 200, 400, 800, and 1,600 points if you consecutively eat all 4 within that time period as they turn blue. So let's talk about Pac-Man and the influence that it had on my personal life. It's one of the leading factors as to why I got into the video game industry back many years ago. But for me, Pac-Man started in 1980 just like everyone else. I was very small back then, and in order to play Pac-Man, I had to push up a chair to the arcade machine in order to see the screen properly. I started playing it at a place called Zare in Pensacola, Florida. While my mom and grandmother would go shopping, they'd hand me a small collection of quarters, and while I wasn't very good at it back then, it didn't matter to me. It was the most amazing thing I had ever seen at the time. And of course, like everyone else, Pac-Man fever affected me as well. And there was a lot of merchandise on Pac-Man back then. There were other games that had things such as like Donkey Kong and Q*bert, but for me, Pac-Man was the biggest one. You could get everything from coloring books to read-along stories, PVC figurines, tabletop games, beach towels. Of course, I watched the Pac-Man cartoon from Hanna-Barbera, which almost every plot line was the same, but being a little kid, I didn't know any better, and what's more, I didn't really care. Of course, there was Pac-Man Fever, a hit song by Buckner and Garcia, and it was basically everything for me. I played it on the Atari 2600 as well, and while back then I knew something was up because it definitely didn't look like the arcade game, but I still loved it anyway, and I played it so much I was able to roll the score back to 0. It was one of the first games that I would have ever been able to do that. And Pac-Man, of course, is coming on in my life. It's always been a constant, though. I've never been able to really resist seeing a Pac-Man machine in the wild and going over there and at least putting a few quarters into it. There have been numerous games and compilations over the years, and it's come out for every system in existence. I've played it on everything from Apple IIc to Xbox 360 to PC to even Google search engine, which that was quite a thing back then. And Pac-Man has been one of those endearing video game characters in my life. I even have a small collection of Pac-Man memorabilia, various vintage items as well as a couple new items here and there. One of the biggest excitements for me was his introduction in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS. I never thought I'd be playing a game where Pac-Man, Mario, Mega Man, Sonic the Hedgehog, Cloud, and so many others would be able to do fights against each other in a giant video game wonderland. It was basically everything I'd ever hoped for, and if you had told my young self that such a game would exist, I never would have believed it. Pac-Man has been around in pop culture as long as I can remember. It's featured in numerous movies, everything from small cameos in Tron to a villain role in Pixels, character cameos in Wreck-It Ralph, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Pac-Man has been and remains an enduring force in my life. I've jokingly referred to him as my spirit animal, as every time I go out I manage to find a little bit of Pac-Man something or other that reminds me of the fun I had with him. It's a special link to a special time in my life. It's a reminder of childhood innocence along with pop culture memorabilia. The characters simple but are endearing. And Pac-Man has remained an enduring pop culture icon that will still have a chance to keep visiting, as long as there's a way to digitally do so. Well, that's everything for this particular video on Pac-Man. I plan to do other videos on other favorite video game series in the future, so I may be able to cover one that you like, but if you have any suggestions, we'll see what happens. You never know. You might remind me of something. Make me go, oh yeah. And I'll even do it in that voice. Oh yeah. So thanks again. If you like the videos, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what I'm doing. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know all kinds of things. I'm pretty easy to work with. You'll find out. Anyway, thanks for stopping by and watching the video, and I will see you that next time. And of course, it's all geek to us. Thanks, and take care.